All right, how are you guys doing today? All right, I have some amazing guys that I want to introduce you to you today, and so I'm going to call them out. I think that they're over there. Are you guys back there? Hopefully. All right, if Brian Smith, are you back there? Can you come on out? All right. All right. For the past 30 years, Brian Smith's iconic portraits of famous celebrities, athletes, and executives have been used in advertising by corporations and have graced the covers of hundreds of magazines, including Sports Illustrated, ESPN, the magazine, Time, Forbes, New York Times Magazine, Elle, and British GQ. Brian Smith. Okay. All right. We have another Brian Och, and that Brian is a New York-based Samsung image logger who blurs the lines between editorial and commercial photography by telling moving stories with still pictures. His work has been seen in Rolling Stone, People, Time, Entertainment Weekly, the New York Times, Travel and Leisure, and major newspapers and magazines around the world. Give it up for Brian. All right, and lastly we have Joe McNally. Joe McNally is an internationally acclaimed photographer whose career has spanned more than 35 years and included assignments in 60 countries. Joe is the last staff photographer in the history of Life magazine. His expansive career has included being an ongoing contributor to the National Geographic magazine, a contract photographer for Sports Illustrated, as well as shooting cover stories for Time, Newsweek, Fortune, New York, and the New York Times Sunday magazine. Give it up for Joe. All right, guys, our talk today is, we're gonna talk about like our biggest wins and our biggest fails that we've had over our careers. So I am super excited to introduce these guys and really get into their heads. We've got some amazing talent up here.
You might want to be careful when you start to dig into our heads here. This could be really scary.
Dangerous.
Good point, Brian.
I know the rest of us are so excited about hearing about you guys and just some of the things that you've had in your expansive careers, all of you, that you've had some of the best things that have happened to you, but we all know that we learn from our biggest mistakes too. So what we'd really like to do is talk about where do we feel like we didn't do exactly what we had set out to do, or what we had deemed like some of our biggest failures, and really what we learned from them. So that's kind of our whole talk today. What I'd like to do is just go ahead and start down the line. And unless you don't want to go first, Joe's off the hook. And really just talk about, in your career, what do you feel like are some things that, or one specific event, any of that you felt like you didn't do what you had set out to do, or you kind of had that mentality of I failed on this, thing?
Well, I think to me as a portrait photographer, the biggest thing that really determines, success or failure is making a connection with the subject. And I think the times that I have failed to do that is the disaster. And ultimately it can be the subject's having a bad day, or, the assignment wasn't set up properly, or you don't have enough time. But ultimately it always falls on the photographer. Like if you don't find a way to make a connection in the time that you've got, there's no one else to blame. So when you asked for this, I did dig through a bit. So if we can pull up the slides, I thought I'd show some examples in terms of like turning stuff around in the course of a shoot. Or the first example I brought was an early picture I did for Forbes magazine of John Kluge back when he was the third richest man in the world. And it was one of those things where it's like, I think he felt like he had to be very formal because it was Forbes, and there were, to be honest, there were certain restrictions. We couldn't show the front of his estate, and, that happens fairly often where people want a certain degree of secrecy. But even so, it's like I left the shoot with this picture feeling I'd completely failed, and it just wasn't that good. And, unfortunately, it's like a lot of times when you're photographing somebody who's high profile, you don't have another shot. And the rare instance on this was, about an hour after shoot, I got a call from his, number 2 guy at the company who was on the shoot, and he said, "How'd it go?" And I kind of went, I think it's fine, it's good. And he goes, you don't sound very convinced. And I'm like, no, John was great. Please thank him for me for his time. And he's like, well, it seemed kind of stiff. Would you consider, did you get what you wanted? Which opened the door up enough for me to go, I'll come back. And the magazine had no idea I was coming back. They asked, this was in the film days, and I just said, everything's fine. So I went back, and sure enough, the next day when we went back, he was much more relaxed. And that's kind of the thing. It's like he had this in his mind. And the only direction I gave the second time around is I said I wanted him to be himself. Not really anything, have him wear jeans and a sweater, but it was just like, I want to see John who he is. And it was a much more relaxed shoot, and we got much better images, and as a result, we ended up with the cover of the magazine.
Oh, yeah.
Which I can guarantee you saw the first picture. That, if I was lucky, was a half-page picture in the magazine. So, sometimes like being humble enough to say, it's like, no, I didn't do the best job I could. And also, in that case, being lucky enough that they kind of had the same feeling, and it mattered enough to them, because normally billionaires don't clear out their schedule for a second time. So I wanted to show some examples after this of a couple times trying to turn it around in the middle of a shoot instead of coming back. And one example of that, I did a book called Art and Soul that I did with the Creative Coalition and partnered up with Sony. Mm-hmm. And one of the people I photographed was Dule Hill, who I loved on West Wing. And it's like I was really excited to photograph him, but one of the things I do in researching is I really don't look for their filmography, what they've done. I want to look for that weird thing that pops out of their bio. And so we've done pictures like this that are, they're perfectly fine, but they pretty much look like actor headshots. There's nothing really special that shows his personality. So he kind of was like, so you got what you want? And I was like, yeah, before we're done, I was reading you love to tap dance. And the shoot immediately changed where he jumped into, do you want to see, and proceeded to tap dance wearing sneakers on carpet, which can't be an easy thing. And told me how his hero growing up was Gregory Hines. So it really changed the complexion of the shoot. And then once we did that, then we were able to, I'm sorry, my clicker's not working. Maybe you could advance for me? There we go, okay, back. Now suddenly works, okay. So then suddenly we start to get some reactions out of him. And it was finding that thing that he wasn't thinking about doing a photo shoot anymore. He was thinking about tap dancing and Gregory Hines. And then it opened him up to this whole creative world of pictures that I couldn't imagine. I didn't say it's like, well, let's go into the shoot and I want you to try to yell at me. These are the sort of things that happen because you put people in the right space. And for the same project, I had a chance to photograph Kelsey Grammer. And a friend of mine was doing interviews with Kelsey. And at the end of the interview, he's go ahead and pitch him. And I showed him some of the work we'd done, and he said, sure, I'll be part of it. And we shot about 10 frames. Here are a few of the early images, and they're at best kind of a representation of what Kelsey looks like, but we're not, go ahead and advance through. We're not really catching much of who he is. It's just kind of like, here's Kelsey in front of the lens. And I had shot 10 frames, and he started to walk away. And sometimes you kind of have to read your audience. The most important thing you can do is kind of become a 5-minute psychoanalyst. And I knew, I could be a little bit rougher on Kelsey than I would for a CEO. So as he started to walk away with well, certainly you must have it now. I don't know where this came from, but I just looked at him and I said, I suppose we do, although to be honest, David Hyde Pierce was much better. And as I said that, I suddenly got frame number 11, if you jump through to the last shot right here, of a very embarrassed Kelsey Grammer who's been upstaged by his Frasier co-star. So, I could not do that same thing with a lot of people, but you kind of have to know the right approach with who you're photographing to bring that shot out. And, it's like I wouldn't have been happy with any of those other shots. There's your one chance to do it, and figuring out what's going to make your subject react the right way is what it's all about.
And, as a fangirl of all of your guys' work, that was one of the things for you that I picked out, especially making that connection with your clients that you have and being able to see that what you can pull out on them. So I like that about your work, and I think that's very cool.
Thank you.
So, yeah. Okay. Anything else you wanted to say about that?
No, you can.
Awesome. Okay, move on.
You can kill Kelsey.
Okay. Brian, all right, up to you. What do you feel like has been some of your biggest mistakes or fails, and then how have you, turned them into something really great?
I think one of my biggest fails, like beginning in my career, was always taking what people give you and not questioning it at all. So if somebody says, we're going to do it in this hotel room, you've got 10 minutes, and that's what it's going to be. I used to be like, okay, and then you get the 10-minute hotel room shot that everybody else got, and it's just generally not good. So when I got a little more confidence, I started thinking to myself, well, maybe there's some way I can, get something else, because I don't want to be the guy getting the same thing that everybody else gets. So they would say it's going to be in a hotel room, it's 10 minutes, and I'm like, that's cool, we should totally do that. There's a great courtyard, and we could get something that looks really good, or we could just do that. That's fine. We can do that boring photo or whatever. And, eventually, like if you say it right, and if you're, good with people, if you try to do it correctly, often if you flatter people, they'll say, yeah, we can do that. And like recently I did this thing with Greta Gerwig. She's like the it film actress right now, indie film actress. And they show up at this hotel in New York, and she's like, the New York Times has a backdrop set up in a room. They get 45 minutes. She's like, we'll give you 5 minutes, and it's got to be in the lobby. And I was like, well, again, there's a great courtyard. And she's like, well, it's too hot. And I said, well, I'll do it in 30 seconds. She said, well, okay, we'll do it in 30 seconds. So she walks out. I was shooting 6x7 film. I put a reflector on the ground, this Joe McNally trick, and it just bounced up some sunlight. 30 seconds, I get the shot, and she's like, that's it? And I'm like, that's it. And then when you look at the picture, my picture versus the great New York Times picture, it's something different. So just early on, like my failure was just accepting what anybody said. Like we're gonna do this, and you just realize, no, you gotta work harder. You gotta work differently to get something better. So.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. I love that because it's really being true to who you are,
Right.
being true to yourself, but then going one step further and putting yourself out there in a place that's really uncomfortable. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's failed many times, which is the failure side of the business. But if you don't put it out there and try to do something interesting, you just always end up with okay work, and it's dangerous. Like I've been shut down many times by people who are like, no, we're not going to do that. And as a matter of fact, we're not going to do the shot. And you're like, can I get her in the hallway?
Right.
Like you have to get something. So in the end, you just take what you can get. And maybe that time it doesn't work. But maybe the next time, they see you, they know you, and they're like, oh, yeah, we can do that,
Well, and that's really good about your personality, that you can be honest with people and put it out there and tell them what you're wanting to do and be able to hear no and then keep going. Because hearing that no, I think a lot of times for us in general is really hard. I feel like, if you hear no, sometimes you just want to stop right there instead of keep pushing it. And it's that pushing past that no and being able to try again and again and knowing that it's going to work out or you're going to get that.
And that's why these guys are so good, because I'm sure they've been told no hundreds of thousands of times. And however they do it, they can get those shots, and you look at it. I always tell people, I'm like, look, we're going to get her standing on the piano and she's going to hold the snake or something crazy. And they're like, that's crazy. And I'm like, this is the shot you want. You just don't know it yet. I know it. And that's what I try to tell people. I'm like, trust me, this is the shot you want. And then when they see it, they're like, oh, that's pretty good.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you very much. All right, Joe, what can you tell us?
Well, I think what you've heard already from Brian and Brian is it can oftentimes come down to an issue of confidence, which you build over time. You build confidence in your tools, and you build confidence in your skills, and also your personality. It's maybe one of the only beauties about getting older in this business, is that you develop a measure of chutzpah a little bit. You're willing to draw the line in the sand and say, no, we're going to do it this way. And early in my career, I didn't have it. I mean, I had some wonderful opportunities. I photographed Cher the night she appeared with Sonny on Letterman, and they sang "I Got You, Babe." And I filled 6 pages of People magazine that night, but I didn't do well because she steamrollered me. I just didn't have the force of ego to kind of push back. There was also the additional complication of that night. Annie Leibovitz was also on the show, photographing Sonny for a cover of Vanity Fair, and she had like 4 or 5 assistants, and I was there with a donkey bag and black and white film, and I got flat, and I felt like a truck had run me over. That kind of thing can happen to you, and over time, you just build up a certain level of maturity and confidence and realization that, look, we're going to work together. And I've actually said this to people, and it takes some guts. I've said, look, I'm really good at what I do. If you give me just a little bit of leeway, we'll come out of here with a good picture. We'll work on it together. I'm going to make this worth your time. I'm not going to waste your time, and we can move forward and get a good photograph, or we can do it, I don't say half-assed, but we can do it the other way. I also agree with Brian that sometimes, you just gotta kind of piss people off, a little bit. How do you think Karsh got the wonderful portrait of Churchill? He grabbed his cigar. Churchill was teed off. And that grumpy look is a picture we will all remember. So I was photographing Vince Carter. There's a power forward in the NBA for the cover of Sports Illustrated for Kids. And, people think athletes are these amazing, energetic people. They are on the field. That's where they get paid to do their thing. In their off time, they're kind of like, can't you just go away? And he was just really slack, and I finally just looked at him. I said, he was playing for Toronto at the time. I said, I'm a Knicks fan, and I actually like Patrick Ewing, and he was like, all right, what do you want, And so he started jumping and leaping at the camera. And so sometimes you just have to draw that line, say, we're going to do it this way, and push back. And that requires confidence, and I think a bit of years in the business to just accumulate that.
I absolutely love hearing that from you, because it does take those years of being able to have that confidence a lot of times to know that you can get what you're good at what you do, and you can grab that shot and you can make it awesome, and you're going to own that. So I love hearing that from you, and hearing that it just takes that, sometimes it just takes that time and confidence and building that maturity in the industry. So fantastic. Okay, so one of the questions I had for you guys was, what was the best advice that you've ever received in your career? Anything that helped you to be more successful, or just best advice you've gotten? Any one of you guys can start.
Best advice I ever got from a picture editor was from Mel Scott at Life magazine, and Mel was wonderful. And you would be nervous and all wired up, and you got an assignment from Life, and you'd be like, oh my God, and he'd say, he could tell you were melting down as you were going out of the office. He'd call you into his office, close the door, and he had this really breathy Texas accent, and all the editors had been talking to you about what they needed and how you're going to do it and this and that, and he would just look at you and say, Joe, I need you to put all that shit out of your head and just go make a picture. And his next piece of advice was, and this is the best thing I literally have ever heard from a picture editor, he said, surprise me.
That's awesome.
Go out there and surprise me. And if you can carry that in your head, man, that really frees you up.
That's powerful.
I think that's awesome. I got to meet Mary Ellen Mark a couple times back in the day, and she did like a workshop, and we turned in all our slides. I was shooting slide film, and she looked at my stuff. She was looking it over, and the whole time I'm like, it's Mary Ellen Mark looking at my stuff. Like I was very excited about that, and she looked at me and she's like, it's really good, and I was like, that's great. And she goes, it's almost there. This one's almost there. She picked one picture out of like, I don't know, 6 rolls of film. She goes, this one's almost there. And she said, you need to be responsible for everything in your frame. And that has stuck with me. Every time I take a camera out, I'm always thinking, I gotta be responsible for everything in the frame, because if it's not, you know, if there's something in the background or anything, it doesn't even matter. It's not there. So I just always keep that in my head. It doesn't matter what I'm shooting. If it's like a car on a racetrack and there's the guy with the flag, you know, like you gotta move, you got just everything about that. So that's the best piece of advice I think I've ever gotten.
And probably the best advice I ever got was I started off shooting sports for the local newspaper when I was in high school. And after a couple years of doing that, I got up enough courage to go to the big newspaper in the state. And I took in my portfolio at the time loose prints of all these sports images, and their chief photographers just flipped through it really fast, going through everything. And he's like shaking his head, and he goes, kid, all this shows me is you can follow focus and get something sharp and do decent action. He said, that's not really what photography is about. He said, if you want to do this for a profession, you have to learn to relate to people and tell their stories. And he said, handed me all the prints back, and he says, get rid of all this stuff and go out and photograph portraits of 50 strangers in a way that says something about who they are. Don't shoot your friends and family, that's too easy. Go up to people you don't know and do a portrait of them that reveals who they are. And that is unquestionably the best advice, because it really changed the way that I approached people. And I realized that it, you know, the pushing the buttons, the most important buttons you're gonna push are not on your camera, they're on your subject. So learning that connection that you can make is far more important than all the technique. And it's something I do to this day. It's like a lot of times when I'm traveling, I love doing portraits of people up on the street, just in a way that tells something to me more about where the place is than just the location. So I didn't get the internship, but I got the best advice I've ever been given.
I don't know about you guys out there, but I am just in awe of how much knowledge is up here and how much you guys have to share with us. I think it's phenomenal.
I think she's saying we've been around a long time.
I'm not that old.
Thank you for saying knowledge and not age.
Oh
Yes.
my gosh, no, I mean, I'm just like melting with all of this great information.
Yeah, it is amazing. Joe and I both started in preschool, so it's
Yeah.
like
It is.
the years in the business, you know, that is from age 3.
Yeah.
So,
You know, but the business can really wear you down. I'm only 30.
Awesome. Well, I think we have a couple more minutes. Let's end on, what do you guys feel like is your proudest moment that you had, or the proudest image, or what just made you, or a project, any of that kind of stuff that really just made you proud of who you are and what you can do with your talents?
you want to start this one off, Brian?
Go for it, Brian.
Sure.
Well, I guess a while back I did a project in New York to help a friend out who had a disease who he eventually passed away from. But I did a project called the Photographer Project, and it was a studio project in my studio where I invited basically every photographer in New York that shot entertainment. So it's a small group of people, and by entertainment I mean like a wire service, like your Getty or AP or the New York Times or Landau or any of those. So they all came into my studio, and the only instruction I gave them was, you got to come as you would come to shoot something. So I left it open. So some people came in a suit because they're always the hired guy. Some people came in, you know, they're paparazzi. And they all came, and I worked with them in about 2 or 3 minutes to get a picture that was them. And there were like 63 portraits. And then I also asked them 20 questions about the career. Like, what did you want to be when you grew up? Like, all these questions. And they answered them, and I made a book about it and tried to sell it to raise money. But I guess when I look over everything, celebrities are cool and everything, but in the end, I learned more about photographing people probably just doing that than maybe any other thing I've ever done.
And I think there's probably a reason, like a lot of times when you ask photographers about it, it doesn't boil down to a shoot, it's more likely a project, because, you know, you can have a great, amazing day and it's memorable, but, you know, a project says a lot more. And, some of the images I was showing earlier with Art and Soul, it probably goes back to the earlier idea where that was originally supposed to be a 3-day shoot, and half a day into it, I'm just going like, early in my career, I would have shot those 3 days, made money, and been happy with the images, and I'm like, I can't stop here. So I proceeded to, out of my own pocket, fund another 16 days of shooting to get it the way that I wanted, and we went from photographing 60 people to about 250, and I think, like, that's one of the things we learned as well. It's like, there were times when, I probably would have gotten a great project and looked at it within the parameters that it was offered and done the best I could with that. But those few times that you've really been given a gem, to know to take that all the way, and it was wonderful because it was just a project to celebrate arts and arts education. So everybody who was coming in they weren't really coming in as major Hollywood stars. They were thinking of the first time that their parents took them to Broadway, or their first high school play or musical, and it just really, that kind of gets back to what we were talking earlier in terms of making that connection. The connection in that case was what we all love. If you want to get photographers to open up, start talking about photography. Same thing with actors and actresses. The roots to what really inspired them.
Wonderful, wonderful. Did you have a quick word that you wanted to say?
Sure, but are we out of time?
We are running out, but I wanted to give you a minute if you wanted to say something. I'd
Say,
love to
Joe.
hear from you guys. So.
I'll be as quick as I can. I think your whole life as a photographer, you develop skill sets and accumulate experience. And then at some point in time, if you're lucky, the stars cross over and you're able to funnel all of that into a project. And that occurred for me in the aftermath of 9/11. I did a project called The Faces of Ground Zero on the world's only giant Polaroid camera, and became an emotional bridge for a bunch of people. It represented New Yorkers well. It helped raise money. So it's not that I would say that I'm proud of myself. That's the wrong sentiment. That moment made me proud to be a photographer.
Oh my gosh, I'm proud to be up here on stage with you guys because it has been such a great journey to be able to listen to you guys. You guys are amazing storytellers, and unfortunately our time is up here. I could sit up here and talk to you guys forever. So thank you all so much for being up here, and we look forward to hearing from you, in the future and everything that you have to tell us. So thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.